We got 16 teams to cover, so let's dive right in to the AFC North. We'll start with the Baltimore Ravens, who, again, like I said, it was a fairly tame free agency period for a lot of teams. And although it's not over, the Ravens are one team that often takes advantage of that later parts of the free agency period. Think about the Jadeveon Clowney move a few years ago. They oftentimes get those guys who are cut by other teams who don't factor into the compensatory pick formula. But their free agency period went a little something like this. They retained Ronnie Stanley. They started off with a bang, getting him done before the tampering period opened up. Retained Patrick Ricard, retained Ben Cleveland, signed DeAndre Hopkins to a small deal. That was really the only notable one. And the only notable loss, Patrick McCarry, who was their versatile offensive lineman from a season ago. Well, they lost him to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So all those moves, B-Mac, what kind of grade do you give them the Ravens free agency?
Yo, Mike, I gave the Ravens a B- so far during free agency. You talked about the big catch they needed to retain left tackle Ronnie Stanley. We all felt like he wasn't going to go anywhere, right? So that wasn't a surprising move in retaining his services. Patrick Ricard, you talked about the versatile, do-it-all offensive weapon for them. He's a huge plus. Losing Patrick McCarry, you talked about the versatility. He's very, very versatile. Lost him to Jacksonville. But outside of, Ronnie Stanley, Ben Cleveland, of course, I understand you brought in DeAndre Hopkins, but DeAndre is closer to the end of his career than the beginning. And you look at some of the other notable wide receivers that were free agents that are still clearly available. They went with the elder of the group. And I'm not saying, Mike, that D-Hop doesn't have any production left, because clearly he still has something left in the tank. But if you're the Baltimore Ravens, especially when it comes to the passing game, you want to become more explosive. You want to become, quicker. You want to become faster. I love Zay Flowers. Rashard Bateman had a heck of a year, but just adding more weaponry to your arsenal, I think would definitely improve the overall offense, because we know what you can do in running the football. So there lies the missed opportunity for me with the Baltimore Ravens. And that's why I gave him a B-.
Yeah, I went B. And it's B for business as usual, because this is just what the Ravens do. They don't go out. If you're expecting them to go out and sign that big name to put them over the edge, they've just never done business like that. They are going to develop from within, name a price for their guys that they want, and then go sign vets. They probably will not be done. They're probably one of the teams that's going to go sign a few guys in July that are going to plug holes throughout this roster, that are vets looking for a home. And then of those, sometimes you get a Kyle Van Noy who ends up being super productive for you over the course of the season. So in my opinion, this was always going to be the case for the Ravens. So getting Ronnie Stanley, that right there is a win in and of itself. But it's hard to see this putting them over the edge in the AFC. But truth be told, they were close last year. They were close enough that if they just retain, draft and develop well, they can still get themselves over the edge with really no additions necessary. Let's get to the Cincinnati Bengals, who were the talk of yesterday after retaining Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. They also retained a lot of guys in this free agency period. B.J. Hill at defensive line, defensive tackle, Mike Gesicki at tight end, Joseph Asai at the edge position, amongst others. Signed to Darryl Slayton from the Green Bay Packers, nose tackle. Signed Samaje Perine, third down back. Didn't really lose anyone either. So for the Cincinnati Bengals, what kind of grade do you give their free agency period?
I gave the Cincinnati Bengals a C+, Mike. And I understand I might be a tough grader, but I gave them a C+, and here's why. When you franchise T. Higgins, he wasn't going anywhere, right? Unless someone gave you a haul that you're looking to receive to trade him. But T. Higgins was going to be in a Cincinnati Bengals uniform. Now, would he have showed up to everything organized that was mandatory? We don't know. But we were under the assumption that he would be a Cincinnati Bengal. Signing Jamar Chase was very, very important, and they got it done. Now, I was surprised to see them get both players signed, but I felt like going into this season, they would be a part of the Cincinnati Bengals based on the contracts and the tag. But outside of that, what was the issue for Cincinnati last year, Mike?
Defense.
So you basically release Sam Hubbard, who eventually retired. You're telling Trey Hendrickson, even though you're trying to work something out, that he can go seek for a trade. Those were your two best pass rushers. Trey Hendrickson had a heck of a year. He led the NFL in sacks, and you have nothing to show for it because your overall defense was bad. You talked about, BJ Hill, no question. Having him back in as the anchor is huge. You talked about Slayton, from the Green Bay Packers, another, quality experienced guy. But how did you improve your defense? The second level and the third level. How? You didn't. So, yeah, you did a great job in making sure you retain your superstars on the offensive side. But in terms of your defense, we know if you don't have a defense, based on what we saw last year, your offense could be unbelievable. You're still not going to win the meaningful games that you need to win. So I'm thinking I was looking to see Cincinnati try to improve the weakness of their team. They made sure they kept the offense intact, but what significant improvements have they done to the defense that you look at and say, that's going to help them. That's going to get them over the hump. So that's why I gave them a C+. Because we know your offense can score. Heck, they were scoring points when T. Higgins was injured last year, and you only had Jamar Chase, right? So we know what they can do offensively. Yeah, your offense will have to outscore people once again. So that C+ is for me.
See, for me, I just love that they got Jamar Chase, T. Higgins re-signed. I think keeping that intact keeps you in every game. And obviously, the defense in its form a year ago was an atrocity. But the problem they're in is all their top draft picks the last 3 years have been on defense. So if you say, we need a corner, our cornerback group wasn't good enough last year. Well, you have 2 second-rounders and a first-rounder slotted to start at corner next year, who are all within their first 3 years in the league. Are you just going to kick those guys to the curb? I mean, maybe Dax Hill obviously coming off an ACL, but he was probably your lone, bright spot from a season ago. So yeah, you could go out and sign guys. You have 2, big money guys at linebacker, and Jermaine Pratt and Logan Wilson. So you're not going to go out and sign another linebacker. You just signed a big money free agent last year at safety in Geno Stone, and we saw how that worked out. And then you have Jordan Battle, who was a third rounder just a couple years ago at safety. So it's you just need these guys to play better, unfortunately. So I think this was not the year. I think defensive line is where I would have invested resources, and they kind of did with TJ Slayton, but it just wasn't going to be a free agency period for them, given that all the contracts they have to resign. But the biggest thing is getting those 2 deals done and getting the Hendrickson deal done. If they get the Hendrickson deal done, to me, it's an A, because
they can get that
last year, the problem was the locker room. You had a completely divided locker room week 1. You had these guys showing up for that Patriots game, not wanting to play it because they all wanted new contracts. And I think in retrospect, they missed the boat on not getting those deals done at that point in time for all 3 of those guys, because all 3, T. Higgins had the injuries, but all 3 balled out when they're on the football field last year. And so the price only went up. But I do think this year, getting all those done, that's your window. That's what matters. The ancillary pieces, they just need to develop better. If those guys don't develop, if those guys that you all drafted don't take a step forward, you were toast in the first place, in my opinion.
Yep.
So I went in. All right, Cleveland Browns. A little quiet free agency period, obviously, because they had to re-sign Myles Garrett. They did that, made him the highest paid player at the time. Obviously, Jamar Chase just topped that contract, but 4 years, $160 million. Traded for Kenny Pickett from the Philadelphia Eagles. Signed Malik Collins, Cornelius Lucas, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Devin Bush, your who's who of former first rounders on the defense side of the ball. And didn't really lose anyone. Now, Jedrick Wills still out there. Their left tackle, former first rounder. Jameis Winston still out there. We'll see. What kind of grade do you give the Browns in their free agency period?
D+.
Ooh.
I gave him a D+. The first thing you stated when you went into this Cleveland Browns segment was they've been very, very quiet. That's what you said, right?
I did.
They've been very, very quiet. I don't disagree with you. I think we all would agree with you, Mike. The Cleveland Browns have been quiet. Myles Garrett, wanted to be traded. You were able to sign Myles Garrett. Great. We know who Myles Garrett is. And even if you traded Myles Garrett, you was going to get a significant haul for him to help your team in terms of quantity, right? Now you got to turn those quantity like picks into quality. We don't know. But you kept Myles Garrett. Kudos, Cleveland. Outside of that, there lies the quietness. For a team that only won 3 games, right? Last year, Mike, 3-14. You have no reason to be quiet during free agency. You have no reason. We just talked about 2 other teams that's in the Cleveland Browns division in the AFC North. Were those teams quiet as the Cleveland Browns? No. And get this, Mike, they had a better record in 2024, but they've made more noise during free agency than the Cleveland Browns. So if you're Kevin Stefanski, and let's keep it real, the elephant in the room, if you're Kevin Stefanski, if you lay another egg, you're probably going to be on the outside looking in as they get ready for 2026. It's safe to say. So outside of retaining Myles Garrett, the biggest notable free agent signing is trading for Kenny Pickett. I would say, I could be wrong, but my opinion is that has been the biggest notable signing for the Cleveland Browns. And you traded for Kenny Pickett. So if that is the biggest notable signing, I'm sorry, I got a D plus is where I have them, Mike. Talk to me. Let me know how you feel. But that's how I feel. When you're a bad team, you have no reason to be quiet when you have an opportunity to improve your roster to some degree. That's how I look at the offseason regimen in terms of the NFL and free agency. They were a bad team. They're too quiet.
The Browns you said they had no reason to be quiet. They had 81.6 million reasons, and that's Deshaun Watson's cap hit in 2026, unfortunately. That's where they're at. Is the bed they made is this god-awful quarterback contract that they cannot get off the books. He is going to cost them over $160 million over the next few seasons on the cap, just because that money was guaranteed. They took a big risk, and it blew up in their face. And so, unfortunately, they have to sign budget deals. And the thing is, I kind of like their budget deals. You know, Malik Collins, I think, is a good interior pass rusher that adds to them. And Cornelius Lucas is a competent backup swing tackle. I think Joe Tryon-Shoyinka is a former first rounder that's worth taking a chance on at the price point that he signed for. So for all those reasons, I give it a B. And I think the Kenny Pickett move is a low risk 5th round pick. You swap Dorian Thompson-Robinson for him. Low risk, potentially could be your starter next year for that team. But there was no dollars to be had here. It was either sign Myles Garrett or go sign other people. And in that equation, I think I'm signing Myles Garrett, right? B-Mac, Myles Garrett for 40, or go out and sign a few other free agents and trade him. I think I would have signed Myles Garrett. So.
Hey, and great point by you. The problem is they utilized money years ago in a quarterback that has tied up everything. But guess what? That's a Cleveland Browns issue. That's a problem they created. That's a problem they created. That's Cleveland Browns doing Cleveland Browns like things. And that's why you're right. They have been as quiet as they've been because they have to, but that's part of the problem. You keep making wrong decisions that you're still paying the price for right now. And I'll say this, when you look at free agency, fans want to be optimistic and believe that because we did this, we did that, we have a better chance in this upcoming season. But but think about this, Mike. If you're a Cleveland Browns fan and you just saw what you saw in 2024, how are you feeling going into 2025? Right now, just based on free agency.
No, not great. And also, your one saving grace is you hold pick 2. Pick 2 could be valuable. Pick 2 could be a home run. So that's your one saving grace. But free agency, your roster is it's uncomfortably the back end of the AFC North.
Think about it, Mike. You're a Green Bay Packer fan, but just imagine if you were a Cleveland Browns fan and you're sitting how you're sitting right now looking at what you did in free agency. Thank you. That's why they get a D+. That's why.
Fair enough. All right, let's get to your Pittsburgh Steelers. They made the big move on the eve of free agency, DK Metcalf trade for a second rounder. That was the big one. They were a little bit quieter in signing free agents, signed Darius Slay, Mason Rudolph, Malik Harrison, the linebacker, Donald Parham, the tight end. They lost James Daniels, interior offensive lineman who had an Achilles tear last year. Dan Moore, their left tackle. Justin Fields, Najee Harris, Dante Jackson, a lot of guys walking out that door. So for that reason, BMAC, what is your grade for the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I gave them a B+. The big notable signing, finding a way to go get a wide receiver one in alpha in DK Metcalf. Of course, when he was available, we felt like he would be moved. But Mike, the last few years, it felt like Pittsburgh, they were missing on wide receiver ones. They've been trying, but they've been missing. So to see this finally become a reality for the Pittsburgh Steelers and a guy who's still in the prime of his career, only 27 years old, and you gave him a contract extension. So this isn't a short-term rental. This is longer than what he had left on his contract. You have to like this for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Instantly, your offense became better. Now, you look at bringing in a guy like Darius Slay. He's 34 years old, but he's still playing really, really good football for a guy of his age, not to mention what he brings in terms of the mentorship throughout the entire cornerback room and just having that championship pedigree and experience. That's huge. I can tell you a signing that I really, really like, and it's under the radar, bringing in Kenneth Gainwell. He's a guy who's been playing some really, really good football throughout his early professional career for the Eagles. He's not a starter. He's not coming to be your starter. But in terms of a third down option, a guy that can kind of spill the starter in the way his running style. He's a smaller guy by stature, but he plays bigger. And he really had a lot of successful, moments with the Philadelphia Eagles. And that's an under the radar signing that I really like. So I'm really loving what I'm seeing from the Pittsburgh Steelers. The reason that the thing that kept them out of potentially getting into that A category, don't have a quarterback. You have yet to make a free agent move in terms of a quarterback. You lost your guy. You haven't brought anybody in. But outside of that, everything they've done so far, really have enjoyed seeing. And also Brandon Echols from the Jets, a scrappy corner. We lost Dante Jackson. You bring in Darius Slay. Echols is a very, very scrappy, quick, potential inside-like corner. Now you add more depth to the cornerback room also, along with Darius Slay.
Yeah, I went incomplete because what you mentioned there, the quarterback position.
Yeah.
If you're rolling in right now with Mason Rudolph, that ain't good enough. And so we'll see what they end up doing there. But I think I'd be in lockstep with you in terms of a B+ grade with what they've done right now, because I love the DK Metcalf move.
Yeah.
I think, people talk about, him and Pickett's skill set being similar. 2X wide receivers isn't a bad thing to have. Two guys that can get down the football field and win on the vertical tree, especially with what, Arthur Smith wants to do offensively. That's kind of like what he had in the Tennessee Titans when they had A.J. Brown and when they had Corey Davis. It's two guys that can run those deep digs, those in-breakers that they love so much off of play action, that offense. So to me, I love pairing those two guys together. If you have a shorter corner, if you have a smaller corner, he's getting picked on if you're facing the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I like that move. It was one of my favorites this free agency period. And I think all their losses are guys I would have let walk out the door. I don't think re-signing Najee Harris was a priority. I don't think Dan Moore was going to command I was paying anywhere near what he ended up getting. And you drafted two tackles in the first round the past couple of years to deal with that. So the only thing is, how do they get over the hump, right? They are firmly still behind the Baltimore Ravens and kind of have been in that division for a little bit here. How did they get over the Baltimore Ravens? It's going to have to happen at the quarterback position. That's where it's going to have to happen. How they're going to get there, a big TBD at this point, and that's why I went incomplete. But I do think, at the end of the day, I like what they did so far, and given where they were in a cap situation, a lot of good moves.